Right. All right. So welcome everybody. My name is Katie. As you know, we've got Mel Goldman, we've got Ben Sherman, and we've got Carla Liederman as your hosts this evening. And we're here to talk about and enjoy 4 different vintages of the cult favorite Leon Millot, or Leon Millot, however you want to pronounce it. I'm gonna jump into, hold on just a moment, because I'm not sharing my screen quite yet, but I'll be in a moment. Okay.
No.
So welcome everybody. Let me make sure that I've got Mel and Ben as co-hosts, just so everybody can see them chatting while they're presenting. Real quick, we are gonna be explaining kind of how it's gonna work. Again, if you have not poured out or at least opened all 4 wines, we recommend you do so, just let them breathe. So go ahead and open all 4 of those bottles. If you have 4 glasses, go ahead and pour those all out into separate glasses, because these wines open up as they encounter oxygen. The other thing to remember is that this is a discussion, not a lecture. So we're definitely going to encourage that any questions, any comments, anything that pops up, you either can use the little like raise hand button that'll give a little indicator on your video, or you can go ahead and just punch a question into the chat and we will address those when they come up. Aside from that, yeah, we're just here to talk about wines and really dig into them. And we hope that if you have questions, you feel comfortable and happy to ask them. No questions are stupid. No tasting notes are wrong. And this is a fun wine and a fun series. So go ahead and pour that 2017. And we're going to start with that one right away. And I'm going to hand this over to Ben so you can lead the discussion.
Ooh, I can smell.
Yeah, so good evening, guys. So what I want to do with you tonight is to kind of determine what makes Leon Millot Leon Millot. And this is strictly from an aromatic flavor profile perspective. As winemakers, you can play with flavor and aroma and texture in a variety of different ways. And often these methods can be rooted in winemaking traditions that are developed a long time ago, or things that are quite fairly new. But that being said, aside from what we do in the cellar, each grape variety possesses a unique flavor and aromatic profile that is expressed in the wine, regardless of the winemaker's approach. So we want to kind of dive into that tonight with your help. This is the exercise that I would do as a sommelier back in the day, and we would taste a lot of wines blind and try to determine variety and origin and vintage. And as you begin to develop your palate, there are certain varietals and wines that you can begin to identify due to their unique flavor profile. So, like for example, Barolo, which is made from the Nebbiolo grape, you can often identify it because it smells like dried roses and tobacco and cranberries, and they have crazy big tannins, and they take on a light red brick color. So we're going to kind of dive into the unique characteristics of the varietal Leon Millot tonight with your help. So we can start by looking at the color of Leon Millot, like the first identifying characteristic. So what are you guys noticing about this Leon in regards to the color?
Dark.
Very concentrated. Yeah, it's kind of got a deep purple and a little bit of magenta color on the rim there. Yeah, it's very, very rich. And to me, that indicates that this is a wine that has a lot of anthocyanin content. And we don't really have any problems from year to year getting this high concentration of anthocyanin. So Leon Millot is very much a wine that takes on this very deep, rich purple color. You're not going to see it looking like Pinot Noir unless you went wrong or you picked it very, very, very early. So that's kind of the one thing I wanted to touch on based on the color there. And going into the aroma.
Sorry, we're on the 2017, right?
Yeah, we're on 2017. Yep, you got it. Yeah. So give that wine a smell. And what I like to think about is, is this wine clean? Does this wine have more of a fruit forward characteristic, or are there more like earthy tones that are dominant on this wine?
To me, it's more earthy tones.
Earthy. Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, I agree with him.
So what kind of earthy characteristics are you guys getting from this wine?
Kind of slate. Yeah, I have to say that. It's a stone earthy nose.
Okay. How about the fruit? What do you guys think about the fruit? Is there black fruit, blue fruit, red fruit?
What do you think? Can't have
Black fruit.
black
Black fruit. Black fruit.
Yeah. What kind of black fruit?
Blackberries.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Leon Millot is all about the blackberries. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you definitely get a little bit of that blueberry going on in there as well.
Blue fruit. Yeah, like about Leon Millot, I think a lot about that blue fruit, kind of the blueberry undertones, but I get a lot of like black cherry up front,
Mm.
and that blackberry kind of mulberry character as well from this wine.
And currants as well.
Yeah.
Definitely from the community.
It's a fairly soft wine. It's not too acidic, I don't think.
No, I'd say it's in balance. Yeah. Absolutely.
Starts as a relatively acidic wine, acidic red wine by comparison to many others, though. But it is in balance.
So how about the tannin when you guys taste this wine? Does this wine have a lot of structure, or the tannin's really fine? And
You better explain that.
Say if you're not an experienced wine taster, what does feel, taste?
yeah, so
express
when we talk about tannin, we kind of refer to it as structure. So tannin is a polyphenol group of molecules that give a wine a tactile sensation in the mouth. It's almost like a drying sensation. Sometimes it feels like it grabs your cheeks, or it can get into your gums and like grabs your gums. It's really evident on some wines that are heavy on the tannin. But this wine for me is on the lighter side.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I kind of imagine it in different size grains of, like, say, sand. So when it's really, really fine tannin, it's drying, but it doesn't grab your mouth the way, say, a Nebbiolo would with these coarse tannins, larger, like, sized molecule tannins in your mouth. So for me, Leon Millot has this. It's a full-bodied wine, but the tannin content is lower, and they're nice and fine and elegant.
Yes, I agree.
And that's why I think it's such a big hit for the people that are buying it. Is that it's really easy to drink, and you can drink it as an aperitif by itself, and it goes well with food, but it can stand alone by itself, and really, really fun to drink. Yeah.
And it also goes beautifully with desserts, or especially chocolate, as well as some blue cheese and cheese.
Chocolate, I agree.
You don't even need chocolate. But he's got that right.
Yeah, so I think that kind of sums it up. For me, when I think about Leon Millot, I think, this very deep, concentrated purple, magenta colored wine that has like really beautiful blueberry fruit aromatics with black cherries. And And we'll see later on that there's some really interesting secondary and tertiary aromas that develop as the wines age. But on the palate, again, that blue fruit, black cherry, black fruit comes through very nicely, and they're really kind of soft in your mouth. And I think we'll probably see that common thread throughout these coming wines. So yeah, that's your 2017, guys.
Well, our cellar has 10 bottles from 2014 up to 2018 that I'm putting aside for when the time is right.
All right.
Would you think, Ben, that how would this wine age, the 17?
I think
I still need to get educated a little bit more. I'm relying on you folks to educate me, but the 2017 is very delicious. I think it's very nice.
All right.
I got a question.
yeah, go ahead.
Is there equivalent European grape with the same name, or is that unique? The name unique to US?
No, we'll get to that. We'll get to the origins of the grape in a few minutes, and where it's planted, where it might be still planted in Europe.
Yeah, I'd say let's hold off on the technical questions for now, because we'd have a little bit of a history lesson to give you guys, and a little bit of the context of Leon Millot within winemaking in general, but also within Keuka Lake Vineyards. So definitely at the end, if there are any more kind of these sort of questions that we've missed, go ahead and ask them. But
All right, just one comment. I really noticed that the front and sides of my tongue are really sensitive to this, or noticeable.
Yeah.
Kind of like a.
Are you talking about color, or are you talking about taste, or what?
Taste like a lemon. Well, you know when you have a lemon, like a tartness.
Mhm.
But again, I've had like unsweetened blackberry juice, and it's similar to that too.
Yeah, you got it. And like that tingling sensation, that's where you're going to experience the acidity on your tongue. So I think that's why it's really you're feeling it really bright and intense in your mouth because of the elevated acidity on this wine. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
If you have a partner there, after sipping a couple of these wines, you might want to look at each other's tongues and see what impact the color has on your tongues.
Make sure it's red.
Just in time for Valentine's Day.
There you go.
It's like we're all wearing lipstick by the end of it.
yeah. All right, before we let this unravel, let's go ahead and jump to our next wine. We're going to go ahead and start tasting the 2015. So if you want to go ahead and pour the 2015 in your glass, if you haven't poured it already, we're going to go ahead there, and we're going to talk a little bit about just the general history of Leon Millot and hybrid grapes. I'm sure you've heard the term hybrids in terms of grape varieties. People talk about vinifera or European wine grapes. They talk about American wine grapes, and they talk about hybrids. But what is a hybrid and why? Hybrid grapes are a crossbreeding of European or Vitis vinifera and American grapes, but why they exist is a little bit of 19th century fun. It's phylloxera, which is a root louse that comes from the United States. It comes from North America. So it's been in North American growing condition, or the North American soil forever. And so American grapes developed pest resistance to it. They're not, obviously they're growing wild. They're doing just fine. You see those kinds of wild grapes growing around trees up here. They're not being decimated by phylloxera. Well, in Europe, in France particularly, these pests had never existed before. So when botanists brought back these grapevines in the 1860s, they absolutely decimated the European wild grape varieties. So you can see on the left-hand side, you've got this teeny tiny little louse. What they do is they burrow into the roots, they make a little nest, they burrow into the leaves, and when they burrow into the roots, they open up susceptibility to fungal infections. And so the the grapevines just wither and die very, very quickly. The turnover time for these generations is only within a few weeks. So back in the 19th century, they were brought in the 1860s. By 1878, a quarter of French vineyards were dead. And by 1895, half of French wine production was gone. This is a cartoon on the right of a little root louse enjoying all the French wine that he is. So it was an apocalyptic event. They were like, oh my God, European wine is going to be no more. It's going to just completely disappear. This is it. This is the end. And what botanists and viticulturists were able to figure out was if you breed together the pest-resistant American grapes and susceptible European grapes, you get a cross that tastes a little bit closer to a European wine grape and doesn't have the same susceptibility to these root lice. So breeding programs popped up. You see, and Mel will explain this a little bit further, but you saw people trying to breed these grape varieties closer and closer to what tastes like a European grape, since American grapes are completely different species, and actually a number of completely different species. You had a completely different flavor profile. So in order to save European wines from this pest, before people discovered the practice of now what we do is grafting. So you'll see European grapevines grafted on top of your American rootstock, which is a whole nother conversation we're not going to dive into, but we can another time if you guys are curious. So that's why these hybrids existed, was because this, apocalyptic type pest essentially threatened to ruin all of European winemaking forever. Mel, if you want to take over.
Could you put that picture back before you go into this, the picture back of the louse, of the Phylloxera louse, and the leaf that had some, okay? Now, if you look, if you see on the picture, you look at the leaf there with those spots, they're actually little bumps. And it turns out that, for example, Leon Millot is now not susceptible to root phylloxera, which kills the vine, but phylloxera can still affect the leaves. And this also happens, by the way, on the Vignoles grape, one or a few of our Vignoles grapes, but it's particularly, in certain years, we find that the phylloxera affects the leaves of some of our Leon Millot. Leon Millot was it was one of the, you might say, middle hybrids. The first hybrids, as Katie was suggesting, were developed in the late 19th century, in the 1870s, 80s, 90s. This one was developed about 1911. It was developed in Alsace. Now, who can tell me where Alsace was in 1911? Come on, there are a number of old timers. What?
Near
What?
Germany.
Well, between France and Germany on the south.
No, but which country was it in? Alsace.
Germany.
German. Who said that? Yes. No, that's correct. Bismarck took over Alsace and Lorraine, and then after the First World War, it went back to France, and after the second, and then the Nazis took it over, and then after the Second World War, it's been back in France. And if you go to Alsace, you find German and French names all over. But this grape was developed, I mean, to answer the question asked earlier, this grape was actually developed in Alsace, not in the United States. It was developed in the Alsace Research Institute in 1911 by a guy named Kuhlmann. Interestingly enough, that's a German name, and he named it Leon Millot, which is a French name. Okay, so that shows you there's a lot of French and German background right there. He developed a number of other, this guy Kuhlmann developed a number of other grapes at the same time. But this one was widely planted. I mean, it was a cross between, it doesn't matter what the cross is. I could give it to you and you wouldn't mean anything to you. But it was widely planted in France. In 1968, still there were 529 acres of Leon Millot in France. It was more in 58, and in Switzerland there still are some acres planted with Leon Millot. In 1975, there were only 41 acres planted in New York State. In including, I guess, in New York, and including the 1.3 acres that Mr. Charles Fournier planted that you are now tasting in the 2015. It's from a vineyard that Charles Fournier planted sometime around 1950. Charles Fournier was
Wow.
brought here right after Prohibition in the 1930s to be the winemaker at Gold Seal Vineyards, which is almost right down the hill from us and right on the lake. He was a real pioneer. He planted hybrids, he planted vinifera grapes, he hired Dr. Frank, and he was apparently a very lovely person. He planted these grapes, and we had in 2004 we took them over, and there were a couple of people that said, "Gee, you got that vineyard. You're lucky. They made the best red wine in the Finger Lakes, in the 1970s and 80s." And we were just selling the grapes. We were harvesting the grapes and selling them. So we decided in 2005 when we started making wines, well, let's try
Yeah,
making
the
some.
next one.
And it's been our best-selling wine. Was our best-selling wine for the first 10 years, and it competes with the Cabernet Franc for our best-selling wine in the latter years. It's got as Katie said earlier, it's got a cult following. It's quite delicious. We found it so attractive that we've planted about the same amount, same number of acres that Charles Fournier planted initially. So we hope in the next few years to be able to finally boost up production, because we've had quite low production. And of course, when you're getting to be my age, which these vines are very close to my age, they get slow and, they don't produce as well. We've got to rejuvenate them a bit, what's beautiful about the vineyard of Charles Fournier is he had two clones. If you were to find any other Leon Millot around, it would be one clone called the Foster clone. And Katie's going to show you now there. If you look to the left of the screen, that's the Foster clone. And if you look at the middle one, that's also the Foster clone. And that's what happens. You see the pinkish grapes? Those are suffering from rot, from either botrytis or sour rot. And you have to remove that rot if you want to make good wine. The Bourdi clone, which is also called the Wagner clone, because the Bourdi Vineyard in Maryland is owned by Philip Wagner, who was also the editor-in-chief of the Baltimore Sun for years and years, and a wine fanatic and a good friend of Charles Fournier. This is the Bourdi clone, which, as you can see, has a much looser, the grapes are much farther apart. Do you see how tight the clusters are on the left and how loose the Bourdi clone is? The Bourdi clone never gets those rots, whereas the Foster clone gets the rots. So if you look at the information on the sheet that was sent to you, you'll see that in certain years, we hardly had any Foster because there was so much rain, like in 2015. 2015 had a lot of rain, and if you notice, it's 80% Bourdi because we got so much rot that a lot of the Foster just fell off. I mean, we had to take off or fell off. We harvest them nevertheless by hand, the Bourdi gets ripe about a week to 2 weeks later than the Foster clone. Hand it back to Ben. Do you want to talk about the flavors and the?
Yeah, I want to discuss it with you guys. So let's jump into this wine, and you guys tell me what you think about this one in regards to maybe some of the differences between the 17 and the 15. I think there's some distinct qualities aromatically and also on the palate that make this wine slightly different from the 17.
It's softer.
Yeah.
The softer.
Definitely.
And how about the quality of the fruit?
I can't tell what it is. Can you?
I can't tell what it is. It feels like it's a stronger.
Yeah, there's kind of more of like a kind of ashy, earthy character on this wine that's really at the forefront.
Like cherries or.
Yeah.
I agree that it's stronger.
Mhm.
It's still soft, but yes, it is stronger in taste. Not really acidic, but it's stronger. I would say smoother.
Yeah. I think it's smoother than the 17. It still has a lot going on though.
I agree.
Yeah, and these berries were harvested a little bit later with a little bit higher sugar content and maturity. So that could definitely lead to that characteristic that you're tasting in this 15 for sure.
You get a little bit less of the coconut, a little bit more of that like boysenberry thing going on. Like when you do it side by side, you get a little bit more chalkiness almost in the 17.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ben, you said you harvested it later, so it had a higher sugar content, but this one has a lower alcohol than the previous wine. How does that come about?
Yeah,
We believe that that there's a mistake in the alcohol.
We've had
that,
some issues with results coming out of the lab we send analysis to.
Interesting.
Yeah. So actually, you'll see the data for the 2020. We just got fresh results today that contradict the results on your sheet. So we'll share that when it comes time to taste the 2020. But the numbers on the sheet are absolutely not.
it was
correct.
from the same lab that just
Yeah.
had some problems with the machinery, so they corrected it.
Got it.
Okay, that makes sense.
Ben, what were you guessing that this one, we didn't finally do this one again, but we're guessing what, for 13 and a half, you think?
yeah, I would say it's around 13 to 13.5. Yeah.
This one almost has a little bit of bitterness to me on the finish that the other one didn't have, which I like. It almost seems a little bit Italian in style.
I agree. A little bit of bitterness there.
What would you attribute the bitterness to? Anybody have any idea? I mean, I think that's true. I mean, it sticks on your tongue more, but it's not tannins. It's not the.
Yeah, it could be a winemaker decision. It could be something that was done at pressing, or it could have been how they were managing the cap. So as we start to develop more alcohol in the must, extraction becomes more intense, particularly on tannin. So we usually have a management strategy to back off on the intensity of working the cap with juice or mechanically with a pump or a punch down tool. So you can sometimes over extract, or you can extract to a certain level of tannin that you want during that.
Could you just explain that, please, Ben, just about the process of fermenting the wine and punching down? Or in those days we only punched down, so it wasn't pumped
Sure.
over. Go ahead.
Yeah. So when you're making red wine, you're fermenting on the skins, and as that fermentation starts to kick off, there's a big release of carbon dioxide. So all the skins start to rise up, and you get this what's called a cap formation. And there's cap management strategies that are slightly different for different desired effects that we utilize in wineries. And at KLV particularly, we use what's called a punch down tool, which is a long metal rod with a round circular base. And what we do is we break up that cap and mix up the skins to homogenize the temperature and homogenize the juice. And if there's, sometimes you can get some microbes in the cap because the pH is a little bit higher. And so we want to mix that up and submerge any potential spoilage microbes into the must. So that's one method of managing the cap. And then in other wineries, I've seen and used pump or irrigator systems. So we can just pump the wine from the bottom of the tank over into the cap, or we have like what's called a sprinkler irrigator system. So it sprays the wine over top of the cap for extraction. And sometimes you can over extract by doing that. So towards the end of the fermentation, when there's a lot of alcohol, you have to be mindful of that. And then another point where tannin and style comes into play is that pressing. So you can over press your skins to extract unwanted characteristics. So that's also another point where bitterness can kind of come into play in the winemaking process.
Do you ever ferment with the stems, and would that impact bitterness as well?
Yeah, we do. We've done some carbonic maceration, which is a little bit different methodology. We do a whole cluster into the tank, but we allow those clusters to stay intact, and the environment becomes totally anaerobic, and it causes an intraberry fermentation to take place. It's more enzymatic, and often we can press and continue fermenting on the juice, but there are other wineries that will do some percentage of whole cluster fermentation. So when I was in New Zealand, some of the producers making Pinot Noir, they would do 10 to 30% whole cluster. And it's very much varies from year to year based on how lignified those stems are. You got to be really careful because there's a ton of tannin in those skins. So you can use that to build structure and build tannin, but you can also incorporate unwanted phenolics into your wine that can cause bitterness.
This 15 vintage, I mean, the thing that most of us old timers remember about 15 is it was the coldest winter that before the season started, the coldest winter we've had in 20 something years. It was the only time since KLV has existed that the lake froze over in front of our vineyards, and and the snows that came in December did not melt until April. I mean, it was quite a winter, and we had temperatures that were horrendous. And it was a year when you were happy to have Leon Millot, because 1/3 of our Pinot Noir vines died in that winter. And we had a lot, even in our Falling Man vineyard, we lost tons of buds plus a number of plants, but there wasn't much death in the Leon Millot. There were buds lost, but not a super large number. But the summer was quite rainy as well. But the Leon Millot crop ended up quite good, and so did the rest of the vines. For what we were able to produce, it ended up being a pretty decent vintage.
Does anybody else have any other flavor notes or questions or comments about the 15 before we move on to the 06? All right, let's go ahead and taste the 06.
So if you guys will just take a second and look at the color of this wine, swirl it around in your glass, kind of hold it horizontal if you have some white paper. And you can notice some of the aging on this wine. There's around the circumference of the wine, there's a bit of it's like a tawny color, kind of like a brown maroonish color. And that's definitely indicative of the age of this wine. It's going on almost 16 years. And as these wines start to age, there's some chemical processes that are happening in the bottle that are changing the appearance of the wine. It's interesting, often as red wines age, they take on that kind of brown tawny color, but they also lose the intensity and the concentration of the color. But I mean, as you can see, this wine does not look any less concentrated than the previous ones that we've tasted, which is quite interesting. There must be just a a ridiculous amount of anthocyanins in these wines. And then on the profile, excuse me, there's a lot of secondary and tertiary aromas that are really interesting. Are you guys picking up on any of those?
Yeah, when I first picked it up, I noticed a different aroma, but I can't quite place it.
Yeah.
It seems slightly like Worcestershire sauce.
Yes. Who was
Yeah.
that? Matthew, good answer.
That's
That's exactly what it is. I struggled with trying to figure out what that was for a couple of years when I was a somm. But it's like Worcestershire and soy.
Yeah. Yeah. Like a marinade.
Leather.
Yeah.
Some leather in there. A little bit of tobacco, but yeah, that's very much it. It's almost like there's a kind of a meaty kind of beef jerky smell to it that I like. I think it's great. Yeah,
you got like little hints of that like meaty sausagey thing in the 15, but it was really only after it had a long time to open up. Like I was only getting it very much towards the end, whereas this one, it just hits you right away. Like, oh, that's got some age on it for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And it kind of brings me to the question you guys ask yourself this as well is, as wines age, what is the appropriate time to open up a wine? What is the best time? And for me personally, I love wines when they're really fresh and they've got like ripe fruit character. But as they begin to age, and it will vary on each wine and region, but as those fruit characteristics start to dry out a bit and you start to get some of these secondary, tertiary aromas, but you don't lose any of that fresh fruit character. You kind of have both of them coming together and blending, and maybe some tannin softening. For me, that's the sweet spot. And this wine has more of those secondary, tertiary aromas and less of that fresh fruit character. But you can kind of see as we tasted these wines, kind of the progression and the evolution over time in the bottle. And how about the palate? How is this wine different from the other ones?
I perceive this one as being more tannic than either of the previous ones, which is interesting because it's older. And I wonder, it also isn't super light in color for a wine with this much age. So I wonder if that's somehow related. I don't know.
Yeah, it could be. It could be. I mean, the tannin and the anthocyanin, those are definitely positively correlated.
I think there are a couple of things. If you notice on your sheet, this was harvested at 19 bricks, which is pretty low for this. And the acids were pretty high.
Yeah.
So, and the Fournier Vineyards, you can see it also in the 2015. The 2015 and the 2006 are both dominated by the clone, the Bourdi clone, which tends to be darker and more acidic, so it's quite interesting, and I think that may also account for the color being even darker at this age.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Mel. Yeah, and yeah, when you look at the chemistry, there's a pH of 3.25, which is really low for a red wine. It's more white wine territory.
Let me elaborate on the bricks. The bricks are a measure of the sugar, and typically, like a Riesling or a Pinot Noir, we aim to get about 22, 23 bricks, maybe to get about a 12% alcohol. Okay, and frequently with the Bourdi clone and this one, you can get 24, 25, even more bricks. That means you're getting a lot of sugar, which means it's going to convert into a very high alcohol wine. Okay. And as the bricks go up, the acids come down. And so when you get a very, very ripe, I think it was you'll see that in the, we'll be seeing that in a moment in the 2020, where you got very ripe grapes. And so the acids were much lower.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted you, Ben. But anyway.
Oh, I think you explained it beautifully, man. Yeah. But it's important to see the difference in the style of that red wine with the pH and the elevated acidity versus some of the previous ones, and then going into juxtaposed to the subsequent wine, which is probably, I think it has the highest pH, probably the lowest level of acidity, and probably the highest alcohol of the group. Even though it says 12%, it's around 14% alcohol. So just kind of keep that in mind when we go on to this next wine. Yeah.
Yeah, another thing to remember too is that 2006 was still pretty early on in Keuka Lake Vineyards as a winemaking operation. So this was also, you can kind of track a little bit of the development of the winemaking style. You can kind of track, the development of the vineyard practices, and it's interesting to see that even in the very beginnings, making these big red wines from this very unique grape, how it's changed and how the process has developed over, however long it's been, 2005 to now. I can't do math.
It's the best.
I wonder how this would go with like a 5-year-old aged cheese. Maybe like cheddar cheese or some little stronger flavor.
Yeah. I mean, it goes fabulously with like a very strong cheese, like a blue. But I'm sure it would go really great with those kind of aged cheddar cheeses that have the lactose crystals in them, and you get that kind of like that sandiness and that acid. I'm sure it would go really great together. The easy way to find out would be to try it yourself. And just let us know,
Don't have any right now, but yeah, you're right.
There's a 5-year aged cheese right next to you there, Katie.
Okay, good to know.
The 2006, there are two things that just to add is, one is when we did, I don't know if any of you attended a vertical tasting. It was either in 2013 or 14 that we did. I think it was 2014. One of the two favorite wines at the tasting was this, it was a Leon Millot vertical tasting. So we tasted the 2005s to 2013, all the Leons. Of the two most favorite, 2006 was one. It was quite interesting. The other thing about 2006 is you can tell from the data, this was a cold and rainy year. So, it was very difficult to ripen the grapes, and a lot of the Foster, and because of the rain, a lot of the Foster clone died, or got rot. Okay. Which of the three so far do you prefer?
Yeah, can't even say.
2017.
You're one of us.
17, definitely.
Thanks, Carla. Yeah, 17.
Agree.
17. 17.
I'm throwing a vote out for 15.
Lucy, did you make that one?
I like the 2015.
Yeah, well, if we're ready to go ahead and jump into the 2020, I think now's a great time. Before we go ahead and let you guys know what the actual data that we got from the lab is today. They said that the pH range is between 377 and 388, so right in the mid 3.7s, which is fairly high for the wines that we do, but it can be pretty typical for red wines. The alcohol is between 14.1 and 14.4. And I can't remember what the TA was because I don't have it in front of me, but if Ben or Mel has it in front of them, or Carla. Do you know what the TA is of this one?
Give me 1 second.
Yeah, I don't have that one handy.
In my email, it's in a tab. I have too many tabs open. But we'll send you guys what that data is at the end of all this. Just
6.15. So 6.15. Yeah.
Or real quick, could you explain what TA is?
Yeah, so it's a measure of the total acidity in the wine. So primarily tartaric acid, but you're going to have the assortment of other acids, but tartaric is about 95% of the composition in wine as far as acidity is concerned. But you've got other acids like lactic or malic or propionic acid and things like that. But it's essentially a measure of tartaric acid. Yeah.
Yeah, and the units in TA is grams per liter. So you're looking at concentration versus pH, which is on a logarithmic scale ranging from 0 to 14. The lower the number of the pH, the higher the acidity. But the difference between 3 and 4 is actually fold, and then the difference between 4 and 5 is another 10-fold. So that means that 3 and 5, the difference between those two is actually 100-fold. So that's why it's helpful to have both pH and TA when describing the acidity of something, because it gives you a sense of how much acid and then how it's perceived. And then on top of that, sugar it can minimize the way that you perceive acid on your palate. So something that has more sugar might seem less acidic, even though it has very, very high acid. A great example of that is Coca-Cola has a really, really low pH and a very high TA, but because it has so much sugar, it's not perceived as that. And acid and sugar definitely work together in a wine or in a food or in a beverage to create a sense of balance. And so when you're looking at how dry a wine is fermented and how much acid there is to begin with, it's kind of all one big balancing act to see how it'll be on your palate and how enjoyable that can be.
More acid.
And acid chemistry is fascinating because you get into like very complex notions of like bigger acids and smaller acids and the way that your tongue perceives that. You look at like the acids from citrus fruits versus grapes are very different as well. But that's a whole nother conversation.
Question about that. When you create the wine, how much of that is sort of scientific and you look at the numbers and go, you need to account for it in more sugar, or is it more about just tasting it and feeling it out?
Yeah, that's a good question. We try to pull from both realms of information. So, when we're planning to pick a vineyard for a particular wine, we definitely have targets as far as chemistry are concerned. So, there's a sweet spot that we know that can achieve a certain wine that we've made in the past. So we've got experiential knowledge that, the Leon Millot has made a fantastic wine for us with, a certain TA and a certain Brix level, and, potential alcohol. And we go out and we sample randomly the vineyard and we measure that in the lab. But next to that, and more importantly, is we get out and we taste the fruit. And we really want to get, develop fruit flavors and that's also pulling from experiential knowledge. And Mel's been really crucial in helping us learn these sweet spots and where these grapes hit the zenith and like the pinnacle of quality. And even if the chemistry is there, we often use the in vineyard tasting to dictate in a perfect world. So we want those both to come together to decide our picking dates and ultimately the style of the wine that we want. But often, like for example, last year, we weren't able to achieve optimal ripeness that we wanted to. So often weather and fungal pressures can cause a harvest to happen when you don't want it to, or you need to make decisions fast to get clean fruit, as opposed to waiting longer to try to achieve that optimal ripeness that you have in your mind, and put the whole crop at risk or the quality of the subsequent wine at risk. So we try to pull all those different points of information to make a good decision on when to pick fruit. Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. Yeah. So should we go into the final wine, guys? The 2020?
Your toes in already. You're missing out.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. So this is actually the first wine I made at Keuka Lake Vineyards. Yeah. Because I came in August of 2020. And, you know, a month later, we were picking Leon Millot, and that was the first fruit that I had my hands on. So,
I love it, Ben. It's the best one, in my opinion.
Happy you like it, Barb.
Barb's a plant. She's biased. She likes
it. Has no association with KLV at all.
No, for sure. I really do.
I think there's a big difference between a 2020 and a 2017. I really like the 2020. I'm more of a Merlot type guy. Rather, seems like my upper palate is noticing this more, a little sweeter, or a little more fruity. I don't know if anybody agrees with that.
Yeah, I think so. Just running it through my mouth here, it's a softer wine than the previous vintage. It's more fruity, and it just flows
Like
nicely.
cherries.
Yeah, there's some cherries in there, like Mary said.
I thought it was like less fruity and it had like more bite. I kind of had, maybe my palate's all different, but I almost had like.
I'm getting a distinct blueberry and black pepper. Like, I think that's very much what I'm getting out of this one. And it's definitely my favorite of the four.
I noticed that the grapes, the percentage between the Foster and the Bordy are switched as far as how much you got out of each one. So why is that? What?
Right on, because it was dominated, in fact, by the new planting, in which there's less Bordy, a little bit more Foster. And it was a year that was so dry and lovely that the Foster thrived. We didn't have any rot. And so we didn't lose any of the Foster. So the Foster, and then we had some problem in vigor in the Bordy, the old Fournier Bordy section. And so the Foster dominated. So it's very interesting. You hit it on the dot, Barb. This is the only wine thus far where the Foster is more than 2/3.
Do you expect that to continue going forward?
No, it's probably going to. I mean, I think we're aiming to be. We're looking for a sweet spot, as has been. I think somewhere in the 50-50 range is probably what we'd be shooting for, because they bring different things to the table. But the Bordy has dominated the others, and it's a more acidic, and it has certain characteristics that are lovely, but it wasn't balanced out with the Foster.
Yeah, and I think moving forward, we're going to try to push hang time and try to get those acids down. But even as those acids go down, the sugars go up really, really fast, I think, on the Bordy clone. And you can have a fruit that has 25, 26 bricks, which is 14% alcohol, but really still a significant amount of acidity in there. So I think we're going to try to maybe push the limits a little bit on that, and bring the acidity down to round out these wines a little further. And with the Foster, we do see a drop of the Foster is less acidic. So try to bring those two together to achieve a certain pH, certain balance in the future. But I feel like the 2020 has achieved that. And there's also one thing to note, that there's some newer French oak on this wine. It's a third use medium toast barrel. So I find I get a little bit of vanilla, a little bit of some cocoa character on this wine. Someone was talking about a bite, that the wine has a little bit of a bite. That could be due to some barrel tannin. It also could be due to the presence of alcohol in your mouth. This is a higher alcohol wine, so there could be some of that heat that you're experiencing, maybe kind of the bite you were talking about.
I like the bite.
Yeah, it's concentrated. It's an intense wine. Yeah, and I think we did 7 days of post-fermentation maceration, which is whenever the yeast have finished their job fermenting all the sugars, the cap sinks down into the juice and it kind of looks like a soup. And we allow that to macerate for an extended period of time, even though there's no microbiological activity from the yeast strain anymore. And what I found that gives the wine more tannin, more flavor. There's almost a balancing of the acidity in the wine sometimes. And so we'll work that tank or that bin really gently to not extract any unwanted tannin, but to try to keep the must healthy taste every day. And we decide when to pull the juice from the skins and press. So I think that's one of the big changes we're doing at KLV is incorporating this extended skin contact with our reds.
Is that fermented in stainless?
It's fermented in they're called Welch bins. So it's a traditional box. It's a plastic. I wish we had a picture we could show you. It's a wooden box that has a plastic liner that is traditionally transportation vessels for fruit. So if you're ever in the Finger Lakes during harvest, you'll see big trucks, flatbed trucks with these big, like half-ton bins of fruit. And the tradition in the Finger Lakes is that we ferment in those typically. And so it was fermented in bins, open top bins, essentially.
It feels absolutely bonkers when you first get here, but it's every winery is doing it essentially. And it works for the region so far.
Yeah.
I have a question for Mel.
The evidence, right?
In my Leon Millot collection between 2014 and 2018, are there any years that you would recommend be drunk earlier than other years?
That's a really good question that I mean, I don't know the answer to. I think because those are all good years. They can all take more time in the bottle. Which one would drink? I think it's a matter of preference. I think the 14 and the 17 were very similar years. They both had these lovely falls that helped ripen grapes. 16 was very much like 20. It was a drought. It was
right.
drier than 20. But it's probably very similar. I think there's more Bourdi in that 16, so it's not going to be as the same profile as the 2020. But I think the acids and the alcohols give it, they're good wines for aging, so they generally age quite nicely. But I wouldn't be able to advise you which to drink first. I think it would be your own preference to a large extent.
Okay, well, thank you.
I might be able to help decide that if we get invited over.
Sure. I mean, yeah, maybe we can get together at some point.
One question is, how long can you store these wines if they're properly stored? How many years would they last?
They've been lasting for at least 10 or 12 years very nicely. And you can see the 06. I think the 06 is an interesting example. I mean, I think we had tried the 07, which was a very dry year. And we thought that was an example of a year that we thought 2 or 3 years ago, that would be best to drink it soon, that it wouldn't last much longer. Would you say, Ben, what is your judgment about 2006? Would it last much longer, or do you think it should be drunk?
I think you should drink it now. Yeah. It's gonna continue to age. I mean, the acidity is such that it's got a ageability there. But as we've noticed, the flavor profile is completely changed, in my opinion. There's not a lot of fruit left in the wine. It's more those secondary, tertiary characters, which I think are enjoyable, and but those are just going to intensify as the wines age. So if you do like fruit character in your wine, like I do personally, then you want to enjoy those wines before you lose it all. And it's up to you to kind of dictate the style. So as these wines age, and as we saw on the 15 and the 17, starting to see some of that leather character, some of that soy Worcestershire sauce, but you still have that fruit up front. Me personally, I like wines that are in that kind of sweet spot, kind of between fresh and aging. So it's really up to you. Like Ed, you should, if you've got multiple bottles, you should open a 14 and see where it's at, and kind of evaluate its flavor profile. And if you like it, then they're ready to be consumed. That's kind of the ultimate answer for you. If you like them, then that's what matters.
Well, you make me want to. I would say, I mean, as you may read, if you read Wikipedia on Leon Millot, okay, you'll find the Keuka Lake Vineyards is mentioned there, and it's mentioned.
Awesome.
Pardon?
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, it's mentioned because it was the 2010 Leon Millot was judged the best red wine in the state of New York in 2011. And so it's time. We don't have very many. Does anybody have a 2010 they'd like to volunteer, and we'll help you?
It's over. No.
But we have some 2010 reserve, and we could taste that and tell you how well that ages. Maybe we should do that before you send out your note, Katie. Taste the 2000.
We could taste the 2010. We could do that. Don't know how productive it would be, but we'll see what we can do.
I think this was a fantastic idea going through the years. And we kind of did something similar over Christmas at our house with different different vineyards of the same variety. And it's tons of fun.
Great.
Happy you liked it.
I think that 2020 is a fantastic wine. So great job, Ben, with that one. I had a question about climate change. How do you feel this variety is going to adapt with the volatility and increasing temperatures?
Do you want to touch on that, Mel, or?
I can. You can correct what I say then, and I'll. My own view is that we'll have the opportunity. On balance, this region has benefited tremendously from climate change. So in general, we've benefited greatly because we have longer seasons. We have on average, later frosts. I was told when we were actually starting the vineyard that, you have to worry about a late September frost. Well, we haven't had I don't remember the last time we had an October frost.
Oh, right.
And the average temperature, or what they call the growing degree days for the last 10 years is way beyond, on average, what it was for the last 50 years. So, but we do get more rain on average. We have, this is a more rainy region. The Leon Millot grape, being a very early ripening grape, is not as affected by the length of the season. So that won't impact it as much. But on the other hand, the warmer temperatures will help, particularly what Ben was talking about earlier, ripening the Bourdi clone, getting letting it get more ripe, getting the acids down. I think we'll benefit from the on average warmer temperatures. That would be my reading.
Yeah, my only thought with that too is that with climate change, you're seeing a lot of these kind of warmer spells in winter with the occasional cold snap that still comes through. And so with Leon Millot being such an early budding variety, the big concern is that any potential late frosts especially as the winters might creep back and like, you see the end of winter happening a little bit earlier, you might see a little bit more of that late frost damage happen in years where the bud break happens in, I think last year it was mid-April we saw bud break, and there was that big scare with April frost that we actually ran out into the vineyard and set out half drums with hay bales in them, and we were prepared to light fires if we had to keep the vineyard warm. And I think this region might see more of those, mild winters that trick the grapes into budding out a little bit earlier.
That's
And
a
so
really
while
good
we're gonna
point.
so while we're going to have these really warm potential summers and warm, long growing seasons, we're also going to have this very early season risk of, the vines being coaxed back to life by mild winters, only to be tricked into a late frost and some loss of buds. So, climate change is gonna affect all regions. You're already seeing a lot of it in Europe. You're seeing it in California. I know at least one winery that already had bud break occur and vines growing, and they're terrified because it's going to be lows of like 34, 33 this week. So they're like, oh, there goes my Pinot. So, the risk of that happening here with a variety like this that buds out so early is definitely on the table.
I'd like to make 2 comments. We were out in Oregon last fall, August, September, and we went to a few vineyards, and there was so much smoke in the air from the fires out there that kind of wondered if that smoke ever migrated it into the juice. But I don't think, I'm guessing not, but it's just a observation. But the second thing is, believe it or not, we started camping just south of you guys back in the mid 80s and mid 80s and 90s. The wines were like $4 a bottle back then, but not near the quality. And between you guys and the other wineries in the region there, it's just world class.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, back in the day, Finger Lakes were all commodity wineries until the vinifera came in with Dr. Frank and Herman Weimer and stuff like that. And so that's when things started turning around. And we started getting a region that had serious wine growing that is turning into something that I hope will surpass the West Coast. And I think we're getting there.
I think we're there now. Some of the wines we had out in the West Coast were, I would say, equal to at the best.
But the thing is, we need people to realize this. Yes, we're producing some fantastic wines, but has the word gotten out in a big level that we're growing and we're producing some significant, excellent wines? I think there's still some kind of pause on whether, because people are still thinking back to the commodity days where we produced a lot of junk wine, as far as I'm concerned. And we need to expand on that and promote it.
Yeah, I see your point, but I'm afraid if it gets well known, then the price will go up.
Or the quality will go down.
Well, that's true, yes, unfortunately, yeah. But I try and promote.
There's a relationship.
I try and promote all these wineries to people outside of the area as much as I can. I'm originally from the Utica area, and I am a big proponent of getting these restaurants out there to look at the Finger Lakes region. One of the places that really, really loves the Finger Lakes region is Taylor and Cook in Utica, and they concentrate on offering their wines from the Finger Lakes. And if you don't know about that, get in touch with these people. They are a farm to table restaurant, and they are dedicated to the Finger Lakes.
I believe Keuka Lake sells wine in New York City and Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
We're actually working on a list of the various retail places that we do have the wines available. So, in the near future, there's going to definitely be a place where you can look up and, if friends are like, hey, where can I get KLV wines or even Finger Lakes wine that I've never had it before, and they're not somebody near you, you can go ahead and point them to that list. Hopefully have that published in weeks or months.
But the last time we had dinner in Utica, when we visited back here a month ago or so, looking at their wine list, I'd say probably 60% they've got a huge wine list, probably 60% of their wines were from the Finger Lakes. Unfortunately, Keuka Lake is not involved, is not presented. And I feel that needs to be rectified.
Yeah, I mean, we're within New York State, so it is a little bit tricky, well, outside of New York City, but what I would suggest is if you have a list of restaurants or retail shops that you don't see our wines at, go ahead and either let us know or even just let the shop know that. I do want to make a couple more comments before we go ahead and wrap this up. The wine club members who are in the Red and White and the Grand Cru Club are going to be getting a bottle of the 2020 Leon Millot in their upcoming March shipment. So that's if you are interested in more bottles, we're limiting it to obviously folks who ordered them as part of this tasting are going to get their order as part of this tasting. But then with the wine club, everyone is welcome to order up to 3 more bottles, just because it's such a limited run. We actually, what was it, 52, 53 cases total, right, Ben? It was a small run. I mean, we did it on our little manual filler as opposed to the big bottling truck that comes through. The other note I wanted to make was that we're going to be doing one more of these virtual tastings this year before we kick into the in-person season and really don't have time to arrange these sort of fun, intimate, like virtual events. And that's going to be April 21st, and it's going to be a horizontal tasting. So what that means is we're going to do 2015, and we're going to look at all the different single vineyard Rieslings from that year, as well as the dry Riesling. So it's going to be a really kind of fun look at the variation between vineyards within the property that we have here, all of it's estate fruit. I think anybody who did our first virtual tasting last year, we did 3 different dry Rieslings. So it was the 15, the 16, and the 18. And a lot of folks had a lot to say about the 15. So now it'll be a chance to kind of look at the components that go into the blended dry Riesling as well. So that's going to be pretty exciting and fun. And you'll see an email probably in March about that, just so we have a chance to give folks, if you give people too much of a lead time, everyone forgets that it's even on their calendar. So we just want to make sure that that goes out in March. And the very last thing is we're going to send out a little kind of feedback form after this, and any and all feedback really does help, so we do encourage you to fill it out. It'll take all of maybe 5 minutes, but it's just a quick survey, asking for how we can improve, things that you liked, wines that you want to taste in the future, elements for this tasting that you might like. I know people in the past have asked us to maybe reach out to a local chef and talk about meal or menu pairings, or even just how you might think about pairing a menu. And that could be something really fun that, if you know a local chef that you really like, please put us in touch with them. That would be cool too.
All right.
Katie, before you finish up, do you want to give everybody an opportunity? Are there any more questions? Are there any that people have, or any more reactions that they want to raise or thoughts?
I like to see everyone's dogs.
Yeah, Jim, that's
You hear 'em a lot.
Barb, where's Bailey?
Well,
Bailey came in, she was drenched, and Dave took her away with him. So I'd love to share her.
Here's our dog.
Let's do maybe a
Aw, look at
Wookiee.
them all.
Oh,
Cute.
I love it.
He's the
I'll
one
bring
that
Bailey
speaks
up
a lot.
soon, Katie.
Yeah.
There we go. There's another one.
Oh.
Right. Oh, Wookiee. Oh, bring them all into the tasting room so I can snuggle them all.
Oh, one more note regarding dogs, actually. The tasting room is dog friendly, but we do, especially in the warmer season, have plenty of outdoor seating, as well as vineyard picnic tables, which are totally dog friendly, picnic friendly, kid friendly. If your kid and your dog want to run through the vineyard, and you can, post up on those tables and kind of oversee, especially birds harvest when birds are an issue. Loud, super welcome. So please bring your loud children and energetic dogs to the tasting room and bring your picnic and go sit at those tables.
It's also a gorgeous view.
Oh, it's beautiful.
It is beautiful, yes.
What's the story about serving in the barn next door?
We're hoping to have a soft opening sometime in April and have full service up and running by May. We did a big renovation project of the barn this past summer and fall. Cut in new windows, put in new flooring for some of the sections, fresh bathrooms. We have a lot planned and we really hope you guys are going to enjoy it. So please come visit us this summer if you haven't been in a while, and also come visit this summer if you've been here recently. We'd like seeing you in person.
Okay.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it, actually.
Yeah, that'll be another, I'm assuming everyone here is subscribed to our email newsletter. All of that comes out on the email newsletter, but we also post about it on Instagram and Facebook. So if you're not following us on those social medias, please do. And then also, I know a lot of our emails that we send out to the listserv frequently get filtered into spam or junk or whatever your filter folder is. If you add Keuka Lake Vineyards, so it's Wine Club at KL Vineyards, if you add that to your contacts list, it should help those emails go to your inbox instead of your junk. And that way you can keep up to date on everything we're doing, and you're not going, wait, I didn't get, because we had a couple people say they didn't get this notifications on when things were happening. It's like, what a bummer. Like, we're trying our best to communicate with you, and technology is just always one step ahead in messing that up.
This was great. Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Come in, yeah.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm curious, who's attending from the greatest distance?
From Rochester, so.
Cleveland,
Well, we're
Ohio.
about an hour and a half from the winery.
We're from Dayton, Ohio.
Okay.
Okay.
East Cyrus, Ohio.
2 rows below where my students were.
First one I attended, I was able to say Half Moon Bay, California.
Now we could just roll some.
We had one last time from Oregon, and we were supposed to have one from Washington State. This
Oh, great.
didn't work out.
We're from Brooklyn, and it's a lot further than I realized before we came up.
It's far. It is very far from Brooklyn. And actually, on that note, it's I think one of the reasons that the Finger Lakes has kind of like been on the verge of being discovered, but not necessarily being discovered by New York City, is that there's no Metro North or Long Island Railroad that gets you straight here. And that's such a, if you're a New Yorker, you don't have a car, or if you do, getting into the city takes an hour to even leave. So like, even though there's this fabulous wine region right in your back door or backyard, it's a pain to get to, and people end up going to the Hudson Valley or Long Island just because it's an afternoon. It's easy to do. But we are in a lot of New York City shops and restaurants, and the more people asking for Finger Lakes wine, and especially Keuka Lake Vineyards, the better.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody for coming. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Guys,
For,
pleasure to see everyone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good luck.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
No,
Good night.